Tele-Action TV Game Mini! In the 1970s, video games were just starting to pick up any sort of steam whatsoever, with the primary invention of Pong pushing arcades into reality, as well as other game consoles such as the Odyssey making it into homes across America. Pong, with its success, then became a home novelty, which made it sell many unique and different Pong systems, including this one right here. And people were all like, "Woo!" Then the 1980s rolled around, and what happened? Yep, people pretty much did this. And they became boring and unentertaining, since you could either get Pong on a cartridge with your many other games coming out, or you were more interested in other games that were far superior to Pong, such as most stuff on the Atari 2600, which by this point had made itself crazy popular enough for everyone to realize a whole entire creep of a system was not worth it, and the 2600 was probably by this point much more affordable. This right here is one of those Pong consoles called the Tele-Action Mini TV Game? Tele-Action TV Game Mini? I don't know exactly, as a lot of companies couldn't label these things properly. Anyways, this is one of those Pong consoles that survived the 1970s. It was made in 77 to be exact, which interestingly enough is also the same year that the Atari 2600 was made. So you could say the competition was pretty high for this thing. I bought this for about $12 at a thrift store, which is probably your most average price to get any of these systems, but I wanted it anyways because every good collector of general video games should have at least one Pong console machine hanging around. So with all Pong consoles, there's always unique quirks about each one. So let's take it out and look at it. Now, you'll have to excuse some of the terrible camcorder footage of the actual gameplay of the systems, as I could hook up the Pong game to a capture card. However, it would take a long, strenuous adventure to convert twin-lee connectors to an RF connector to a composite connection, which is the lowest video output my capture card takes, which I really don't feel like making happen, so we can see an already crappy output of Pong, so deal with it. So the first thing you notice is that it really isn't actually a console per se, but more of two controllers, and that's it. Which is nice until you realize that both controllers have their own set of unique buttons. Now, before I explain the buttons and the console itself, let's go over how to power this thing on first. Now, you can plug in a DC adapter, which means going out into the world and finding a store that still carries that kind of thing, or in my case, since I will probably only power this thing for about 10 to 15 minutes, go grab a pile of batteries. How many batteries does this thing take? Well, let's use our modern day controller reference to show how disappointing the 1970s really were. So I apologize to any older generation people for this, but it must be shown. So here we go. Alright. Well, there's one Xbox 360 controller. It's not too bad. Looks, uh-oh, there's two. Well, it can't get any worse since I only own two. But, you know, that's a, oh no. Oh no, that's an Xbox One controller. Yep, this thing takes an excellent 6 AA batteries. I imagine it's because each controller is functioning too much as two consoles working together, with power being drawn on one side, meaning power consistently going back and forth, meaning that this was probably a horrible design choice altogether. Now then, back to the controller itself. First off, I was really confused when I first turned it on, since there's no light to indicate that it's even working at all, but if it didn't work at all, I probably wouldn't be doing this review. This is an awful setup for the controllers, and it's not a physical design issue, as I found holding it to be perfectly fine, so it's an issue with how the buttons are all laid out. On the first controller, you have reset, which resets the game as well as starts the game, the slider to control the paddle, and then you have the power switch to do exactly as such, powered on. On the other controller, you have another slider for the second player, and then you have all of these game options, such as the ball speed adjuster, which makes it faster and slower. You have a ball angle adjuster, which I think makes the ball deflect in more crazier angles, but I didn't really see any sort of difference. You have a paddle size adjuster to make the paddle smaller or larger, and then you have a game switcher, which gives you 4 game options. You have tennis, which is standard Pong, hockey, which gives you 2 paddles to control instead of 1, squash, which is essentially wall ball, which now that I think of it, let's go look up what squash is, since I've heard the name but don't have any idea of what the sport is exactly. Yes, so because it's English, us Americans, or at least myself, are more familiar with the sport being called racquetball as opposed to squash, which is a vegetable for us. And lastly, a practice mode for when you want to get your Pong on but have nobody to play with at the moment. Anyways, so as I was saying earlier, the controllers have serious issues because you have the reset button on controller 1 as well as the power switch, and on controller 2 you have all the adjustment buttons, which, by the way, can be adjusted mid-game. This is why having it not be a console is a bad idea, because you know that when you invite your friend over to play a rousing game of Pong that there will be some serious tomfoolery the first few rounds before you either get mad and don't want to play anymore, or you finally agree to be reasonable with each other and play the game. Of course, this would probably happen anyway, so who knows if this is a good point. Now, one of the biggest things you realize is how difficult it is to actually aim with the slider. I'm not Mr. World Champion of Pong or anything like that, but this thing's precision is awful. You make a couple good shots, but you just miss everything else, and you can't use the, oh, this thing is just aged and doesn't work as good as it used to. That is a load of crap, because it really isn't the greatest thing to control. One thing else to note is that in most Pong games I played, you generally hit the wall at the top or the bottom with the paddle. However, with this thing, if you go all the way to the top on the slider or to the bottom on the slider, you will go straight off the screen and miss, making this already not precise slider just that much more worse. I guess we should also talk about the audio-visual portion of this as well, since, you know, that's like probably the most main part of any video game out there. There's not much to say, honestly. It's Pong. The sound comes out of the TV, and the game is basic Pong in black and white, and that's about it, really. I mean, what do you want? It's Pong. Overall, it's an okay Pong console, and there are far superior ones out there, but this one has enough quirks about it to be unique enough to fit happily into my collection, so I guess it's okay.